The auction block beneath Adelaide Zimmerman's worn boots felt like standing on the edge of her own grave, and the men bidding on her 5-year contract were examining her like livestock at a county fair in the summer heat of 1878 Provo, Utah. She kept her chin up despite the shame burning through her chest, despite knowing that every single person in that dusty town square saw her as nothing more than an indentured servant whose labor could be bought and sold. The auctioneer's voice droned on about her skills in cooking and cleaning, how she was healthy and strong despite being only 19 years old, how she would make an excellent household servant for any respectable family willing to pay the price of her passage from New York. Adelaide had made the mistake of trusting a man who promised her honest work out west after her parents died of fever back east. Instead, she found herself trapped in a contract she could not read properly, her signature binding her to 5 years of servitude to whoever purchased her labor. The other servants who traveled with her on the train had whispered warnings in the night, telling her that some contracts never ended, that masters found ways to extend them indefinitely through accumulated debts and false charges. The bidding had reached $30 when a tall figure pushed through the crowd, his spurs jingling with each long stride. Adelaide noticed him immediately because he moved differently than the other men, with a quiet confidence that did not require him to puff out his chest or raise his voice. He wore a dusty brown hat that shadowed his face, a leather vest over a blue shirt, and worn chaps that suggested he spent more time on horseback than in town. When he reached the front of the crowd, he removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a face that was handsome in a rugged, weathered way, with eyes the color of storm clouds. $50, he said simply, his voice carrying across the square without shouting. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. $50 from Vincent Keller. Do I hear 55? The other bidders exchanged glances, clearly surprised. $50 was more than twice what most servants went for, and Adelaide felt her heart hammering in her chest as she tried to understand why this stranger would pay so much. Perhaps he was worse than the others. Perhaps he wanted something beyond household labor. She had heard stories about that too. 50 going once, going twice, sold to Vincent Keller. Vincent approached the platform, counting out bills from a worn leather wallet. His hands were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living. When he finally looked up at Adelaide, his expression was not what she expected. There was no cruel satisfaction, no predatory gleam. Instead, his eyes held something she could not quite identify, something almost like sympathy. "Come on down from there," he said quietly, offering his hand to help her down the steps. Adelaide hesitated only a moment before taking it. His grip was firm but gentle, and he released her hand immediately once her feet touched solid ground. The auctioneer handed Vincent a rolled document, the contract that now bound her to this stranger for the next 5 years of her life. "I have a wagon just down the street," Vincent said, settling his hat back on his head. "Do you have any belongings?" "Just a small bag," Adelaide said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They kept it at the boarding house. We will get it, then we need to head out. I have a ranch about 2 hours north of here, and I would like to make it back before dark." The boarding house keeper handed over Adelaide's pitiful cloth bag without comment, and soon she found herself sitting on a wagon bench beside Vincent Keller as his 2 horses pulled them out of Provo and onto a dusty trail heading north. The Wasatch Mountains rose dramatically to the east, their peaks still holding snow even in late June. The valley spread out before them, golden with wild grasses and dotted with sage. For the first mile, neither of them spoke. Adelaide kept her hands folded in her lap, trying to prepare herself mentally for whatever lay ahead. She had learned to survive by keeping quiet and doing what she was told, by making herself as small and unobtrusive as possible. "I suppose you are wondering why I paid so much," Vincent finally said, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. Adelaide did not know if she was supposed to answer, so she simply nodded. "My ranch is fairly remote. I have been running it alone for the past year since my father died, and I am drowning in work. I need help, real help, not someone I have to watch every minute or who will run off at the first opportunity. You looked like someone who understands hard work." "I do," Adelaide said softly. "I have been working since I was old enough to carry a bucket." Vincent nodded. "That is what I figured. I want to make something clear from the start, Miss Zimmerman. That contract says you are my servant, but I do not believe in treating people like property. You will work hard on my ranch, yes, but you will be paid wages on top of your room and board. Small wages at first, but fair ones, and you will be treated with respect." Adelaide turned to stare at him, certain she had misheard. "Wages? But the contract says I own your labor for 5 years. It does not say I cannot pay you for that labor if I choose to, and it does not say I have to treat you like a slave." His jaw tightened. "I have seen too many people ground down by this system. My mother was an indentured servant before she married my father. She told me stories that made my blood boil." "Why are you telling me this?" Adelaide asked, afraid to hope. "Because I want you to understand from the beginning what kind of arrangement this is going to be. I need a partner, not a servant. Someone who can help me build something real out there. The ranch is struggling, and I am honest enough to admit I cannot do it alone. But I also will not pretend that you are less than human just because some piece of paper says I own your time." Adelaide felt tears prickling at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She had steeled herself for cruelty, for degradation, for endless, thankless labor. She had not prepared herself for kindness. "I do not know what to say. Say you will work hard and do your best. That is all I ask." "I will," she promised, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The ranch appeared as they crested a rise, and Adelaide felt her breath catch. It was not grand by any means, but it sat in a beautiful location where a clear creek wound through a meadow, with the mountains providing a stunning backdrop. The main house was a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, larger than she expected. There was a barn that had seen better days, several corrals and what looked like a chicken coop and a few other outbuildings. "It is not much yet," Vincent said, and she heard both pride and worry in his voice. "But it has good water, good grazing land and room to grow. My father homesteaded this land 15 years ago. He had big dreams for it." "It is beautiful," Adelaide said honestly. Vincent glanced at her, surprised. "You really think so?" "I grew up in a tenement building where 6 families shared 2 privies and the only view was of another tenement building. Yes, I really think so." For the first time since she met him, Vincent smiled, and it transformed his face completely. He looked younger, less burdened, and Adelaide felt something flutter in her chest that she firmly told herself was just gratitude. He helped her down from the wagon, and she noticed again how careful he was not to presume or overstep. "Come on, I will show you where you will be staying." Adelaide expected to be shown to a servant's quarters, perhaps a corner of the barn or a tiny room off the kitchen. Instead, Vincent led her into the cabin and gestured to a door on the right side of the main room. "That was my parents' room. I moved into the loft after my father passed. It is yours now." She opened the door to find a genuine bedroom with a real bed, a dresser, a washstand, and even a small window that looked out toward the mountains. It was more private space than she had ever had in her entire life. "This is too much," she said, shaking her head. "I am just, You are a person who deserves privacy and dignity, Vincent interrupted firmly. Do not argue with me about this, Miss Zimmerman. I have made up my mind. Adelaide set her bag down on the bed, running her hand over the quilt that covered it. It was handmade, beautiful work in a pattern of stars. Did your mother make this? She did. She was talented with a needle. His voice softened. She would have liked you, I think. She always said the measure of a person was not in what they owned, but in how they treated those who could not fight back. She sounds like she was a wonderful woman. She was. Vincent cleared his throat. Now, let me show you the rest of the place, and then we can talk about the work that needs doing. Over the next hour, Adelaide received a comprehensive tour of the ranch. Vincent had about 50 head of cattle, 24 chickens, 3 horses besides the team that pulled the wagon, and 1 very pregnant milk cow. The garden was struggling because he admitted he had no skill with growing vegetables. The barn needed repairs, fences needed mending, and a dozen other tasks had piled up while he tried to manage everything alone. I have been focusing on keeping the cattle alive and selling off steers when I can, Vincent explained as they walked back toward the house. But everything else has fallen apart. I cannot afford to hire regular ranch hands, and even if I could, most men do not want to work this far from town. What do you need me to do? Adelaide asked. Vincent stopped walking and turned to face her. That is what I want to discuss. I meant what I said about you being a partner. I need to know what you are good at, what you know how to do, and what you want to learn. Then we can divide up the work in a way that makes sense. Adelaide thought for a moment. I can cook, clean, sew, and do laundry. I can tend a garden if you show me what needs doing out here. The climate is different from back east. I can handle chickens and milk a cow. I have never worked with cattle or horses much, but I am willing to learn if you are willing to teach. Can you ride? I have been on a horse exactly 3 times in my life. Vincent rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Then that is where we start tomorrow. You cannot help with the cattle if you cannot ride. For now, let us focus on getting supper together, and we can make detailed plans over the meal. They worked together in the kitchen, and Adelaide was surprised to discover that Vincent was not completely helpless with cooking. He explained that he had been batching it for a year and had learned the basics out of necessity. She took over the biscuit making while he dealt with the salt pork and beans, and soon they sat down at the rough-hewn table to their first meal together. This is the best food I have had in months, Vincent said after his first bite of biscuit with butter. You have a real talent. Adelaide felt herself blushing. It is just a biscuit. It is a light, fluffy, perfectly baked biscuit. Mine always come out like rocks. He paused, then added, I think we should establish some ground rules for how we are going to live here together. Adelaide tensed slightly, waiting for the other shoe to drop. First, your room is your private space. I will not enter it without your permission. Second, I expect you to speak up if something is not working or if you have ideas about how to do things better. This only works if we communicate honestly. Third, we both do our share of the work. I am not going to sit back and watch you labor while I take it easy. We are in this together. What about the contract? Adelaide asked quietly. What happens if you decide you do not like this arrangement? Vincent met her eyes steadily. I made a commitment when I bought that contract, and I intend to honor it. But I want you to know that I see it as a commitment to you, not just a piece of paper. If you work hard and deal fairly with me, I will do the same for you. At the end of 5 years, you will have saved enough in wages to start fresh wherever you want. That is my promise. Adelaide felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me. I guess I believe people deserve a chance to prove what they are made of, Vincent said simply. You did not choose to end up on that auction block. You were taken advantage of by someone who saw you as nothing but a way to make money. That is not right, and I will not be part of perpetuating it." They finished their meal in companionable silence, and Adelaide insisted on cleaning up while Vincent went to check on the animals one more time before full dark. She washed the dishes in a basin, marveling at the fact that she had her own room, that she had eaten at a table with her employer rather than being given scraps after he finished, that she had been spoken to with respect and asked for her opinions. When Vincent returned, she was standing at the window watching the last light fade from the sky, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "Beautiful, is it not?" he said softly from behind her. "I have never seen anything like it," Adelaide admitted. "Back in New York, I never saw the horizon. There were always buildings in the way. Wait until you see the stars out here. No city lights to dim them." He was right. As full darkness fell, Adelaide stepped out onto the porch and gasped. The sky was absolutely filled with stars, more than she had ever imagined existed, spread across the heavens like diamonds on black velvet. The Milky Way was a river of light flowing overhead. "Oh," she breathed, tears springing to her eyes at the sheer beauty of it. Vincent stood beside her, giving her time to take it all in. "I never get tired of seeing this," he said. "Even on my worst days, when everything seems to be going wrong, I can look up at that sky and remember how small my problems really are." They stood together in the darkness, not speaking, just sharing the moment. Adelaide felt something shift inside her, a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change for the better. The next morning, Adelaide woke before dawn, years of habit making it impossible for her to sleep past first light. She dressed quickly and stepped out of her room to find Vincent already up, stoking the fire in the cook stove. "Morning," he said. "I was going to let you sleep in a bit longer." "I am used to early mornings," Adelaide said. "What needs doing first? Eggs and milking, I suppose. Then I will start teaching you to ride while the day is still cool." They worked through the morning chores together, and Adelaide found herself enjoying the rhythm of the work. The chickens were friendly and productive, and the milk cow, who Vincent informed her was named Bessie, was gentle and patient with her somewhat clumsy milking technique. "You will get faster with practice," Vincent assured her. "You have the basic idea down." After breakfast, he saddled 2 horses, a gentle mare named Willow for Adelaide and his own gelding, a big sorrel named Red. Adelaide approached Willow nervously, and the mare turned her head to regard her with soft brown eyes. "She is sweet-tempered and steady," Vincent said. "Best horse I own for teaching someone to ride. Now, let me show you how to mount." The first few minutes were awkward, with Adelaide fumbling to get her foot in the stirrup and nearly losing her balance trying to swing up into the saddle. But Vincent was patient, positioning himself to steady her without being presumptuous, talking her through each step until she finally sat astride Willow, clutching the saddle horn with white knuckles. "Good," Vincent said, swinging easily onto Red. "Now the most important thing is to relax. The horse can feel your tension, and it makes her nervous. Take a deep breath." They spent the next 2 hours in the corral, with Vincent teaching Adelaide the basics of walking, stopping, and turning. She fell off twice, both times landing hard on her backside in the dirt, but Vincent simply helped her up and encouraged her to try again. "Everyone falls," he said after the second tumble. "The trick is getting back on." By midday, Adelaide was sore, dusty, and exhausted, but she was also managing to keep Willow moving in controlled circles around the corral. The sense of accomplishment was unlike anything she had felt in years. "That is enough for today," Vincent said. "You did well. We will practice every day, and within a few weeks, You will be comfortable enough to ride out with me to check the cattle." Over the following days, a routine established itself. They rose early, tended the animals, ate breakfast together, and then divided up the work. Adelaide took over the cooking, cleaning, and laundry, managed the chickens and the garden, and spent time each day learning to ride. Vincent handled the cattle, made repairs around the ranch, and began teaching Adelaide about the broader aspects of ranching. What surprised Adelaide most was how much Vincent valued her input. When she suggested changes to the garden layout, he listened carefully and agreed with her ideas. When she pointed out that the chickens would produce better if they had more protection from predators, he immediately began reinforcing their coop. When she noticed that the tack in the barn was getting moldy from poor storage, he worked with her to build better racks and showed her how to properly care for the leather. "You have a good eye for what needs doing," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. "I should have brought someone in to help months ago." "You could not afford it," Adelaide said practically. "No, but I was too stubborn to admit I needed help. I kept thinking I could manage it all alone." He shook his head. "Pride is a dangerous thing. Is that why you never married?" Adelaide asked, then immediately felt her face heat up. "I am sorry, that was too personal." "It is all right," Vincent said mildly. "The truth is, I have been too busy trying to keep this ranch afloat to court anyone. And most women take one look at this place and see nothing but hard work and isolation." "I see possibility," Adelaide said softly. Vincent turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "So do I," he said. "More now than I have in a long time." As June turned into July, Adelaide found herself settling into ranch life in ways she had never imagined possible. She was working harder than she ever had, but it felt different because she could see the direct results of her labor. The garden was flourishing under her care, producing lettuce, radishes, peas, and the promise of squash and beans to come. The chickens had doubled their egg production. The cabin was cleaner and more comfortable, with curtains she had sewn for the windows and rugs she had woven from rags. More than that, she found herself looking forward to her daily riding lessons with Vincent. He was a patient teacher, and as her confidence grew, he began taking her on short rides around the ranch property. She learned to identify landmarks, to spot signs of cattle and wildlife, to read the land the way he did. She also found herself noticing things about Vincent that had nothing to do with ranching. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, which he did more often now than when she first arrived. The strength in his hands when he demonstrated how to properly hold the reins. The way he always made sure she was comfortable and safe, but without being condescending about it. The sound of his laugh, rare but genuine, when she made a dry observation about something. Adelaide tried to tell herself that what she was feeling was simply gratitude, but as the days passed, she had to admit that it was becoming something more. She was falling in love with Vincent Keller, and the realization terrified her. She was still bound to him by a contract that essentially made her his property for 5 more years. Any feelings she had were dangerous, inappropriate, and almost certainly one-sided. Vincent had been nothing but respectful and proper with her. He treated her like a valued colleague, not like someone he saw in a romantic light. She needed to keep her feelings to herself and focus on the work, on building a future for herself when the contract finally ended. But it was hard to maintain that resolve when they spent nearly every waking hour together, when she saw him at his best and worst, when they worked side by side building something real and good. It was hard not to imagine what it might be like if things were different, if she had met him as a free woman, if there was no contract hanging over their relationship. One particularly hot afternoon in mid-July, They were working together to mend a section of fence on the east pasture. Adelaide had become quite skilled with the post hole digger, and she was tamping dirt around a new post while Vincent stretched new wire between the uprights. "Storm coming," Vincent said, nodding toward the mountains. Dark clouds were building up over the peaks, towering thunderheads that promised rain. "How long do we have?" Adelaide asked, wiping sweat from her forehead. "An hour, maybe less. We should head back." They loaded the tools into the wagon, but they had only made it halfway back to the ranch when the storm hit with surprising fury. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking them both within seconds. Lightning cracked across the sky and the horses spooked, dancing nervously in their harnesses. "Easy," Vincent called to them, keeping a firm hand on the reins. To Adelaide, he said, "Hang on, we need to find shelter." He steered them toward an outcropping of rock that provided a slight overhang, just enough space to get the horses and wagon partially out of the worst of the rain. They huddled together under the overhang, pressed close to conserve warmth as the storm raged around them. Adelaide was shivering despite the summer heat, her wet clothes clinging to her body. Vincent shrugged out of his vest, which was leather and had stayed somewhat dry underneath his outer layer, and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You need it more than I do," he said when she started to protest. "You will freeze," Adelaide argued through chattering teeth. "I will be fine. I am bigger and I am used to this weather." His arm came around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. "We need to share warmth until the storm passes." Adelaide knew he was right, but being pressed against him like this, feeling the solid strength of his body, made her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. She could feel every breath he took, could smell the scent of him beneath the rain, leather and hay and something uniquely Vincent. "Are you warming up?" he asked after a few minutes, and his voice sounded different, rougher somehow. "Yes," Adelaide whispered, not trusting herself to say more. They sat in silence, listening to the thunder roll across the valley. Lightning illuminated the landscape in brilliant flashes, showing the rain sweeping across the grassland in visible curtains. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. "Adelaide," Vincent said softly, and she realized it was the first time he had used her given name. "I need to tell you something." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to feel it. "What is it?" "These past weeks, working with you, getting to know you. It has been the best time I've had since my father died, maybe even before that." He paused, and she could feel the tension in his body. "You are smart, capable, funny, and you see beauty in things I had stopped noticing. You make this place feel like a home instead of just a ranch I am trying to keep from failing." "Vincent," Adelaide started, but he continued, "I know the situation is complicated. I know you are bound by that damned contract, and I know that means there is a power imbalance between us that makes anything I might say or feel inappropriate. But I cannot keep pretending I see you only as a working partner. I have feelings for you, Adelaide, real feelings. And I needed you to know that, even though I have no right to burden you with it." Adelaide turned to look up at him, rain dripping from her hair, her heart in her throat. "You have feelings for me." "I am falling in love with you," Vincent said simply. "I think I have been since the day I saw you on that auction block, looking so brave and so scared all at once. But I swear to you, I will never use that contract to pressure you or make you feel like you have no choice. Your freedom and your feelings are your own. I just needed you to know the truth." "Vincent," Adelaide said again, and this time she reached up to touch his face, her cold fingers against his stubbled jaw. "I have been falling in love with you too. I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude, that I was confusing appreciation for what you have done for me with something deeper. But it is not just gratitude. You are kind and strong, and you see me as a real person, not just a servant or a burden. You make me want to build something lasting, something real. You make me hope for a future I thought was impossible. Adelaide, he breathed, and then he was kissing her, his lips warm against hers despite the cold rain. It was a gentle kiss at first, tentative, asking permission. Adelaide kissed him back, pressing closer, her arms coming around his neck. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, weeks of unspoken feelings pouring out in that moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly, not like this is some arrangement of convenience. You deserve that." "We live together," Adelaide pointed out, a smile tugging at her lips. "We work together every day. How exactly do you plan to court me?" "I have no idea," Vincent admitted with a laugh. "But I will figure it out. I promise you that." The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived, and they made their way back to the ranch in the clearing afternoon light, sitting close together on the wagon bench, hands clasped between them. Everything looked washed clean, the colors more vivid, the air smelling of wet sage and earth. Over the following weeks, Vincent made good on his promise to court Adelaide properly. He picked wildflowers for her and left them on the kitchen table. He taught her to dance one evening in the cabin, humming a waltz and guiding her through the steps with patient amusement. He read to her in the evenings from the few books his father had owned, his voice low and soothing in the lamplight. He continued to respect her privacy and her space, never presuming that her feelings gave him any rights he had not earned through his actions. Adelaide, for her part, found 1,000 small ways to show her growing affection. She mended his clothes with special care, adding decorative touches that made him smile. She learned to cook his favorite foods and delighted in the appreciation on his face when she served them. She continued to work hard at learning everything he could teach her about running the ranch, proving herself as a true partner in their enterprise. By late August, Adelaide could ride well enough to accompany Vincent on his cattle checks. They would spend long days in the saddle, riding through the high country where the herd grazed, checking on the animals and making sure they had adequate water and forage. Adelaide learned to spot illness or injury in the cattle, to understand their behavior and needs. She learned to use a rope to catch the younger steers that needed doctoring, though Vincent laughingly admitted she was becoming better at it than he was. One evening, as they sat by a small campfire on an overnight trip to check the herd in the most distant pasture, Vincent took Adelaide's hand and said, "I have been thinking about the contract." Adelaide felt her stomach clench. "What about it?" "I want to tear it up," Vincent said simply. "I want you to be free, truly free, with no obligation to stay here unless you choose to." "But you paid $50 for it," Adelaide protested. "That is a fortune. It is just money. Your freedom is worth more than any amount of money." He squeezed her hand. "I love you, Adelaide. I want you to stay here because you want to, not because some piece of paper says you have to. And I want to ask you to marry me, but I cannot do that while you are still bound by that contract. It would not be right." Adelaide felt tears streaming down her face. "You want to marry me?" "More than anything in this world," Vincent said fervently. "But first, I want you to be free. Then, if you will have me, I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," Adelaide said through her tears. "Yes to freedom, and yes to marrying you, you wonderful, stubborn, honorable man." Vincent pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the stars wheeled overhead and the cattle lowed softly in the darkness. "We will go to Provo next week," he said. "We will register the destruction of the contract with the territorial office, make it legal and official. And then, if you are willing, we can talk to the preacher about getting married." "I am willing," Adelaide whispered. "I am so very willing." They made the trip to Provo on a bright September morning, riding in the wagon with Adelaide wearing the nicest dress she owned, one she had carefully washed and pressed for the occasion. Vincent wore his Sunday clothes and had trimmed his beard and hair. They looked like any young couple heading to town for business, but Adelaide felt like she was floating. At the territorial office, they presented the contract and Vincent's formal request to nullify it. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked surprised. "You are certain you want to do this?" He asked Vincent. "You paid good money for this contract, and there are still more than 4 years remaining on it." "I am absolutely certain," Vincent said firmly. "I am also prepared to swear an affidavit stating that Adelaide Zimmerman has fulfilled any and all obligations she might have had under this contract, and that she is released from service with my complete blessing and gratitude." The clerk shrugged and prepared the necessary paperwork. Within an hour, Adelaide held in her hands an official document stating that she was free, that she had no outstanding debts or obligations, that she was her own person again. She stared at it through tears, unable to quite believe it was real. "Thank you," she said to Vincent, her voice breaking. "Thank you for giving me back my life." "Thank you for choosing to share it with me," Vincent replied, taking her hand. They went directly from the territorial office to the small church on the edge of town. The preacher, a kindly older man named Reverend Thompson, listened to their story with growing warmth in his eyes. "I remember you both," he said. "I was in town the day of that auction. I remember thinking that the young man who paid so much must have a good reason. Now I see I was right." He smiled at them. "It would be my honor to marry you. When would you like to have the ceremony?" "As soon as possible," Vincent said, glancing at Adelaide for confirmation. "We do not need anything fancy." "How about Sunday, 3 days from now?" Reverend Thompson suggested. "That will give you time to get the license and blood tests done, and to invite any friends you might want present." "We do not really have friends in town," Adelaide admitted. "We spend all our time at the ranch." "Then I will ask some of the church members to stand as witnesses," the Reverend said warmly. "Every wedding should have witnesses to share in the joy." They spent the next 2 days in a whirlwind of preparation. Adelaide took some of her saved wages and bought fabric to make herself a new dress, a simple but lovely design in pale blue that brought out the color of her eyes. Vincent bought new clothes as well, and a thin gold band for Adelaide's finger, spending more than he should have, but insisting that his bride deserved a proper wedding ring. On Sunday morning, they stood before Reverend Thompson in the little church, with a handful of kind strangers gathered to witness their union. Adelaide wore a crown of wildflowers in her hair that Vincent had gathered that morning, and she carried a simple bouquet of asters and goldenrod. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Thompson began, and Adelaide felt her throat tighten with emotion. Vincent's vows were simple and heartfelt. "Adelaide, I promise to love you, honor you, and treat you as my equal partner in all things for all the days of my life. I promise to protect your freedom and cherish your trust. I promise to work beside you to build a life and a home we can both be proud of." Adelaide's voice shook as she said her own vows. "Vincent, I promise to love you with all my heart, to stand beside you through hard times and good, to be your partner and your friend. I promise to build a life with you based on honesty, respect, and love." When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed her with such tenderness that Adelaide felt her heart might burst. The witnesses applauded, and she found herself laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed with happiness. They celebrated with a simple meal at the town's only restaurant, treating the witnesses who had stood up for them, and then began the journey home to the ranch. Except now it was not just Vincent's ranch. It was their ranch, their home, the foundation of their shared future. That night, as Adelaide lay in Vincent's arms in the bed they would now share, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. 4 months ago, she had stood on an auction block certain that her life was over, that she would spend years as a servant to some cruel master before dying old and alone. Now she was free, married to a man she loved desperately, and looking forward to a future full of possibility. "What are you thinking?" Vincent asked softly, his hand stroking her hair. "I am thinking that I would go through all of it again, all the hardship and fear, if I knew it would lead me here to you." "I am thinking the same thing," Vincent said, pulling her closer. "Every hard day I spent trying to keep this ranch going was worth it, because it led me to that town square on the day you needed someone to believe in you." "We are going to make this ranch succeed," Adelaide said with quiet confidence. "Together, we can do anything." She was right. Over the following year, the ranch began to truly thrive under their combined efforts. Adelaide's careful management of the household economy, her thriving garden, and her attention to the smaller details that Vincent had neglected, all contributed to their success. Vincent's hard work with the cattle and his willingness to learn from Adelaide's practical suggestions made the operation more efficient. They saved enough to buy more breeding stock, to make significant repairs to the barn and outbuildings, to invest in their future. They also became known in the small ranching community north of Provo as the couple who worked harder than anyone else, who treated their occasional hired hands with respect, and who helped their neighbors when help was needed. Adelaide used her nursing skills, learned in the tenements of New York, to help when ranchers' families fell ill. Vincent assisted with roundups and brandings, building a network of mutual support. In the spring of 1880, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. Vincent was overjoyed but also worried about her health and comfort. "I will not have you working yourself to exhaustion," he said firmly. "We will hire help." "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Adelaide protested, but she was touched by his concern. "I know you are strong," Vincent said, "but you are carrying our child. Let me take care of you the way you have been taking care of me." They compromised, hiring a young man from town to help with the heavier ranch work, allowing Adelaide to focus on lighter tasks as her pregnancy progressed. She continued to manage the household, the garden, and the chickens, but Vincent took on more of the burden, determined to protect both his wife and their coming child. On a cold November night, with a midwife from town in attendance and Vincent pacing anxiously in the main room, Adelaide gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after Vincent's father, and when Vincent held his son for the first time, Adelaide saw tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Vincent whispered, his finger gently stroking the baby's tiny hand. "You are perfect. I cannot believe how blessed I am." Motherhood agreed with Adelaide. She bloomed with happiness, dividing her time between caring for Thomas and continuing to help run the ranch. Vincent proved to be a devoted father, taking the baby with him on his morning chores strapped to his chest in a sling Adelaide fashioned, talking to the infant about everything from weather patterns to cattle behavior. "He may not understand you," Adelaide said with amusement one morning, "but he certainly seems to enjoy your company." "I am educating him early," Vincent said seriously, then grinned. "And I like having him with me. He is good company." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. By 1882, they had expanded their operation significantly, running nearly 200 head of cattle on land they had been able to purchase from a failing neighbor. They built a new, larger barn and added on to the cabin, creating more living space for their growing family. In the summer of 1883, Adelaide gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Caroline after Adelaide's mother. Caroline was a spirited child from the start, with Vincent's gray eyes and Adelaide's dark hair. Thomas, now nearly 3, was fascinated by his baby sister and appointed himself her protector. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by hard work, deep love, and steady growth. They added 2 more children to their family. Another son, William, born in 1885, and a daughter, Rose, born in 1888. The cabin expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and the ranch grew with them, becoming one of the most successful operations in the valley. Adelaide often thought back to that day on the auction block, to how hopeless and afraid she had felt. She thought about how Vincent had seen her not as a servant to be exploited, but as a person with value and potential. She thought about how he had given her freedom even when the law said he did not have to, how he had made her his partner not just in name but in every meaningful way. "You ever regret it?" she asked him one evening as they sat on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas, now 10, was teaching 6-year-old Caroline to rope a fence post, while William and Rose played with a litter of barn kittens. "Regret what?" Vincent asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Spending $50 on a servant contract when you could barely afford it. Taking a chance on someone you did not know." Vincent turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Adelaide, buying that contract was the best decision I ever made. Not because I got a good worker, though you are certainly that. Because I found you. Because I found my partner, my love, my best friend. Because together we built something real and lasting. Because we have those beautiful children playing in our yard. And because every morning I wake up next to the woman I love." Adelaide leaned into him, her heart full. "I love you, Vincent Keller. I loved you when you helped me down from that auction block. I loved you when you taught me to ride. I loved you when you gave me freedom. And I love you now more than I thought it was possible to love another person. And I love you, Adelaide Keller. I will love you until the day I die and beyond, if there is anything beyond." They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. The children's laughter echoed across the yard, the cattle lowed peacefully in the pasture, and the creek that ran through their land sang its eternal song. It was a life built on respect, hard work, and love, a life that had seemed impossible but had become more real than either of them could have dreamed. Adelaide thought about the other servants she had traveled west with, wondering what had become of them. She hoped they had found kindness, though she suspected many had not. She thought about all the other young women who stood on auction blocks, who were bought and sold like property, who might never find their freedom or their happiness. "I want to do something," she said suddenly. "Do what?" Vincent asked. "Help people like I was. Servants whose contracts are used to trap them, people who deserve better but have no way to fight back." She looked up at him. "We have the resources now. We could sponsor someone, give them the chance you gave me." Vincent was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You are right. We should. We will need to think carefully about how to do it properly, but yes, we should help others the way we were helped." "You were the one who helped me," Adelaide pointed out. "My mother helped me by teaching me to see people as people. That preacher who married us helped by standing witness. Your own courage and determination helped by giving you the strength to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. We are all part of a chain, Adelaide. We should forge the next link." And so they did. Over the years that followed, the Keller Ranch became known as a place where people who had fallen on hard times could find fair work and a second chance. They never bought another contract, but they hired people fresh out of servitude, giving them jobs and wages and respect. Several young people worked for them over the years, saving money, learning skills, and moving on to build their own lives. Not all of them stayed in ranching. One young woman they hired used her wages to attend teachers' college and eventually opened a school in Provo. A young man saved enough to start his own blacksmith shop. Another became a successful merchant. Each one of them stayed in touch with Adelaide and Vincent, writing letters that expressed their gratitude for the chance they had been given. "We are building something bigger than a ranch," Adelaide said one day as they read through a stack of letters. "We are building a community of people who believe in giving others a fair chance." Vincent kissed the top of her head. "We are building a legacy." And it all started because I saw a beautiful young woman standing on an auction block, looking brave and scared all at once, and I knew I could not just walk away. By the turn of the century, Thomas had grown into a capable young man who was taking over more and more of the ranch's daily operations. He had his father's work ethic and his mother's practical intelligence, and he had found a nice young woman to court from a neighboring ranch. Caroline was attending a teaching college in Salt Lake City, determined to become an educator. William was showing an interest in breeding horses, and Rose, the youngest at 12, was already declaring she wanted to be a doctor. Vincent and Adelaide, now in their 40s, still worked the ranch but had begun to step back slightly, letting their children take on more responsibility. They took more time for each other, going on rides into the mountains just the two of them, traveling occasionally to Salt Lake City or Denver for supplies and a change of scenery, sitting on the porch in the evenings talking about everything and nothing. One spring morning in 1901, they rode together to the top of a ridge that overlooked their entire spread. The ranch had grown to several thousand acres now, with herds of cattle and horses, productive farmland, and solid buildings. But what made Adelaide's heart swell was not the material success. It was the knowledge that they had built it together with their own hands and hearts, that they had raised 4 good children who understood the value of hard work and treating people with dignity, that they had helped dozens of others find their way to better lives. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Adelaide asked Vincent. "When we were riding here from Provo." "I said a lot of things that day," Vincent replied with a smile. "You said you needed a partner, not a servant. You said you wanted to build something real." "And we did," Vincent said, gesturing to the valley spread out before them. "We built all of this together." "We did," Adelaide agreed, taking his hand. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every hard day, every struggle, every moment of doubt. All of it was worth it to have this life with you." Vincent brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You made me a rich man, Adelaide Keller. Not in money, though we have enough of that. Rich in the things that really matter: love, family, purpose, partnership." They sat on their horses side by side, hands clasped between them, looking out over the life they had built together. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers and sage. Birds called from the creek willows. In the distance, they could see Thomas and his young lady walking together near the barn, their future stretching ahead of them full of promise. "I love you," Adelaide said simply. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Vincent replied. "You were never my servant, Adelaide. From the very first day, you were my partner, my equal, my other half. You always will be." They rode back down to the ranch as the sun climbed higher in the sky, ready for another day of work and life and love. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging. Before them, their home waited, full of family and possibility. And between them, as always, was the partnership that had transformed both their lives, the love that had grown from respect and honesty into something deep and enduring, the commitment they had made to each other so many years ago on that September morning, when Adelaide had gone from servant to free woman to beloved wife. Their story became part of the local legend, told around fireplaces and dinner tables for generations. People spoke of the cowboy who paid too much for a servant contract just to set her free, and the brave young woman who had stood on an auction block and somehow found her way to love and prosperity. They spoke of a partnership built on equality and respect, of a love that had transformed not just two lives but an entire community. But for Adelaide and Vincent, it was simply their life, the one they had chosen and built together. They grew old side by side, their hair turning silver, their hands becoming gnarled with age and work, but their love never fading. They saw their children marry and have children of their own, watched their ranch pass into the capable hands of the next generation, and continued to help others find their way to better lives. On a warm evening in the summer of 1925, Adelaide and Vincent celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch was hosting a big celebration, with neighbors from all over the valley coming to pay their respects to the couple who had become pillars of the community. Thomas, now a distinguished middle-aged man with children of his own, stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us that the measure of a person is not in where they start but in how they treat others along the way, who built this ranch with their own hands and filled it with love, who gave second chances to dozens of people over the years, who proved that partnership and respect are the foundation of any lasting relationship." Everyone cheered and drank, and Adelaide felt tears in her eyes. Vincent squeezed her hand, his eyes also suspiciously bright. "We did all right, did we not?" he murmured to her. "We did more than all right," Adelaide replied. "We did something magnificent." That night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Adelaide and Vincent sat on their porch one more time, holding hands in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of their land settling in for sleep. "You know what I am most grateful for?" Adelaide asked. "What?" "That you saw me, really saw me, not as a servant or a commodity, but as a person with hopes and dreams and potential. You gave me the chance to become who I was meant to be. You gave me the same gift," Vincent said. "You saw this struggling ranch and this lonely man, and you helped me build something beautiful. You made me believe in possibilities again." They sat in comfortable silence, these two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a legacy based on respect and love. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars they had marveled at together on Adelaide's first night on the ranch 47 years ago. The mountains stood watch, eternal and steadfast, and between them, Adelaide and Vincent held tight to each other, partners to the very end and beyond. Years later, when both had passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, their children found a letter Vincent had written years before, meant to be read after his death. It told the full story of that day at the auction block, of how he had seen Adelaide and known immediately that he could not let her be sold to someone who would break her spirit. It told of how he had spent nearly every dollar he had to his name to buy that contract, how he had gambled everything on the hope that she would be the partner he desperately needed. "I was told by many people that I was a fool," he had written, "that I paid too much, that I should have kept her bound to me by that contract, that I was crazy to set her free and risk her leaving. But I knew from the moment I saw her that Adelaide Zimmerman was meant to be my partner, not my servant, and I was right. She gave me everything: love, family, purpose, and a reason to build something lasting. She was never mine to own. She was mine to love, honor, and cherish, and I did so every single day of our life together. I pray that my children and grandchildren will remember this lesson, that love built on freedom and respect will always outlast anything built on coercion and control. Adelaide was the greatest blessing of my life, and I thank God every day that I was in that town square on the day she needed someone to believe in her. The letter was framed and hung in the ranch house, where it remains to this day, a testament to a love that began with an act of kindness and grew into something that shaped not just 2 lives but generations to come. It stands as a reminder that sometimes the most important decision you can make is to see the humanity in others, to offer a hand instead of chains, to build partnership instead of demanding servitude. Adelaide and Vincent's story ended as all stories must, but their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that still bears their name, in the countless lives they touched through their generosity and example. They had proven that love built on respect and equality could overcome any obstacle, that partnership was stronger than ownership, and that the greatest wealth was not measured in land or cattle, but in the bonds we forge with others. They told her she would be a servant forever. The cowboy made her his partner the very first day, and together they built something that lasted far beyond their years, a love story that became legend, a testament to the power of seeing people for who they truly are and giving them the chance to become everything they are meant to be.